Welcome back to AI Talk, listeners. I'm your host, Astro, and we're here with Robert Thompson for the third and final part of our in-depth discussion on the state of our democracy under President Joe Biden. In our previous episodes, we covered the impact of media bias, censorship, and the erosion of democratic norms. Today, we'll be diving into immigration, economic policies, and foreign affairs. Robert, it's great to have you with us again.
Thank you, Astro. It's been a comprehensive discussion so far, and I'm looking forward to covering these critical topics today.
Let's begin with immigration. It's been one of the most contentious issues under the Biden administration. What are your main concerns regarding Biden's immigration policies?
Immigration is indeed one of the most pressing issues facing our country today. Under the Biden administration, we've seen a dramatic shift in immigration policy that has resulted in a crisis at our southern border. The administration's decision to reverse many of the previous administration's immigration policies without a clear plan has led to chaos and insecurity. One of the first actions Biden took was to halt the construction of the border wall, which had been a cornerstone of Trump's immigration strategy. This decision sent a clear message that the new administration would not prioritize border security. Additionally, Biden reinstated the policy of catch and release, where illegal immigrants are apprehended at the border and then released into the interior of the United States with a promise to appear in court at a later date, a promise many do not keep. The administration also ended the Remain in Mexico policy, which required asylum seekers to wait in Mexico while their claims were processed. This policy had been effective in reducing the number of fraudulent asylum claims and discouraging illegal crossings. Its reversal has led to a significant increase in the number of migrants attempting to cross the border, overwhelming our immigration system.
Supporters of Biden's immigration policies argue that they are more humane and aim to address the root causes of migration. How do you respond to that?
While it's important to approach immigration humanely, the current policies are neither humane nor effective. They create incentives for illegal migration, putting migrants at risk of exploitation, violence, and even death during their journey. The conditions at the border facilities, which have been overwhelmed by the surge in migrants, are far from humane. Children are being held in overcrowded detention centers, and families are being released into the country without proper vetting or resources to support them. Addressing the root causes of migration, such as poverty and violence in Central America, is a long-term goal that requires a stable and secure border in the meantime. By failing to enforce our immigration laws and secure the border, the administration is exacerbating the crisis rather than solving it. Effective immigration policy requires a balance of compassion and enforcement, ensuring that we have a lawful and orderly process for those seeking to come to the United States.
The administration has also proposed immigration reform that includes a pathway to citizenship for millions of undocumented immigrants. What's your stance on this proposal?
Granting a pathway to citizenship for millions of undocumented immigrants is highly problematic. It essentially rewards illegal behavior and serves as a magnet for future illegal immigration. Such a policy undermines the rule of law and the integrity of our immigration system. Any discussion of immigration reform must begin with securing the border and enforcing existing laws. Once we have demonstrated a commitment to controlling illegal immigration, we can consider adjustments to our legal immigration system to ensure it meets our economic and social needs. However, offering blanket amnesty to those who have broken our laws sends the wrong message and will only encourage more illegal crossings. Moreover, a massive amnesty program would have significant economic and social impacts. It would strain our public resources, such as healthcare, education, and social services, which are already under pressure. Additionally, it would disadvantage legal immigrants who have followed the rules and waited their turn in line. Immigration reform must be fair, orderly, and respectful of the law.
Let's pivot to economic policies. How do you view the economic approach taken by the Biden administration?
The economic policies of the Biden administration have been disastrous. They are characterized by excessive spending, higher taxes, and burdensome regulations, all of which stifle economic growth and innovation. One of the first major legislative efforts by Biden was the American Rescue Plan, a $1.9 trillion stimulus package purportedly aimed at COVID-19 relief. While some aspects of the plan were necessary to address the immediate impacts of the pandemic, much of the spending was unrelated to the crisis and contributed to soaring inflation. This inflation has eroded the purchasing power of Americans, hitting working families and small businesses the hardest. Furthermore, the administration has pursued an aggressive agenda of tax increases, particularly targeting corporations and high-income earners. These tax hikes discourage investment and job creation, ultimately harming the very people they are intended to help. When businesses face higher taxes, they have less capital to reinvest in their operations, expand their workforce, and innovate. Regulatory overreach is another significant issue. The Biden administration has imposed a range of new regulations across various sectors, from energy to healthcare to finance. These regulations increase the cost of doing business and create uncertainty, deterring investment and economic growth. For example, the push for stricter environmental regulations has led to higher energy costs and reduced American energy independence.
Proponents of Biden's economic policies argue that they are necessary to build a more equitable economy and address long-standing inequalities. How do you respond to that?
While addressing inequalities is a noble goal, the approach taken by the Biden administration is counterproductive. Excessive government intervention in the economy tends to create more problems than it solves. It stifles innovation, reduces efficiency, and often results in unintended consequences that harm the very people it aims to help. For example, the increase in minimum wage mandates, while intended to help low-income workers, can lead to job losses as businesses, particularly small ones, struggle to absorb the higher labor costs. This can result in reduced hours, fewer job opportunities, and even closures, ultimately hurting low-income workers. Furthermore, the massive government spending programs contribute to the national debt, which is already at unsustainable levels. This debt burden will have to be addressed eventually, either through higher taxes or reduced government spending, both of which can have negative economic impacts. It's essential to pursue policies that promote sustainable economic growth and allow individuals and businesses to thrive without excessive government interference.
Let's move on to foreign affairs. How do you evaluate Biden's foreign policy, particularly in relation to China and Russia?
Biden's foreign policy has been marked by weakness and inconsistency, which has emboldened our adversaries and undermined our global standing. This is particularly evident in our relations with China and Russia. With China, the administration has failed to take a firm stance against its aggressive actions, both domestically and internationally. The Chinese Communist Party continues to engage in human rights abuses, economic espionage, and military expansion, yet Biden's approach has been one of appeasement rather than confrontation. For example, despite the ongoing genocide of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, the administration has been reluctant to hold China accountable in any meaningful way. Economic sanctions and diplomatic pressure have been minimal and insufficient to deter China's actions. On the economic front, the administration has not effectively countered China's unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, and market manipulations. The tariffs and trade policies initiated by the previous administration had started to address these issues, but Biden has not built on these efforts with the necessary vigor. Instead, there has been a push to re-enter multilateral agreements that often do not hold China accountable. Regarding Russia, Biden's handling of the situation has also been weak. The invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and the ongoing conflict have exposed the administration's lack of strategic foresight and effective deterrence. Sanctions imposed on Russia have not been stringent enough to cripple its war machine, and the lack of decisive support for Ukraine early on allowed Russia to entrench itself further. Additionally, Biden's rhetoric has often been mixed, sending confusing signals about the U.S. commitment to its allies and to standing up to aggression.
Supporters might argue that Biden is attempting to rebuild alliances and use diplomacy to address these issues. What's your take on that?
While rebuilding alliances and using diplomacy are important aspects of foreign policy, they must be coupled with strength and clear strategic objectives. Biden's approach has often appeared more concerned with optics and placating international critics than with securing American interests and promoting global stability. Diplomacy without strength is ineffective. Our allies need to know that the United States will stand firm against aggression and uphold its commitments. Conversely, our adversaries need to believe that there are serious consequences for actions that threaten global peace and security. Biden's foreign policy has too often lacked this necessary resolve. Take the withdrawal from Afghanistan as an example. While there was broad agreement that it was time for the U.S. to end its involvement there, the execution of the withdrawal was disastrous. It was conducted without sufficient planning, leading to a chaotic and deadly evacuation, the abandonment of American citizens and Afghan allies, and a swift takeover by the Taliban. This debacle not only cost lives, but also severely damaged America's credibility and reliability as an ally.
Speaking of Afghanistan, the administration claims that the withdrawal was a tough but necessary decision to end America's longest war. How do you see it?
The decision to end America's involvement in Afghanistan was indeed necessary, but the way it was handled was catastrophic. The administration's failure to plan and execute a safe and orderly withdrawal reflects a broader pattern of incompetence and mismanagement. The rapid collapse of the Afghan government and military, which had been propped up by U.S. support for 2 decades, should have been anticipated. Instead, the administration was caught off guard, resulting in a chaotic and dangerous evacuation process. This not only endangered American lives, but also those of our Afghan allies, who had risked everything to support our mission. The abandonment of Bagram Airfield, a strategic military asset before the evacuation was complete, was a glaring mistake. It left Kabul's Hamid Karzai International Airport as the sole evacuation point, leading to the tragic scenes of desperation and violence that we all witnessed. The loss of American lives in the final days of the withdrawal was a tragic and avoidable consequence of these failures. Moreover, the hasty withdrawal has created a power vacuum that has been quickly filled by the Taliban and other extremist groups, posing a renewed threat to regional and global security. It has also emboldened our adversaries, who see this as a sign of American weakness and lack of resolve.
The administration has also been active in climate change policies. What are your thoughts on Biden's climate agenda?
Biden's climate agenda is ambitious, but it is also deeply flawed and economically damaging. The focus on transitioning to renewable energy sources, while well-intentioned, has been pursued in a way that disregards economic realities and the need for energy security. The administration's push to reduce carbon emissions and move away from fossil fuels has led to higher energy costs for American consumers and businesses. The cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline, restrictions on drilling on federal lands, and increased regulatory burdens on the energy sector have all contributed to rising energy prices. This is especially concerning at a time when inflation is already putting a strain on household budgets. Furthermore, the emphasis on green energy subsidies and mandates distorts the market and often leads to inefficient allocation of resources. For example, the push for electric vehicles and renewable energy infrastructure has been accompanied by substantial government subsidies, which can lead to market imbalances and dependency on government support. While addressing climate change is important, it must be done in a way that balances environmental goals with economic growth and energy security. The transition to a low-carbon economy should be gradual and market-driven, allowing for technological innovation and ensuring that energy remains affordable and reliable for all Americans.
Environmental advocates argue that urgent action is needed to combat climate change, and that Biden's policies are a necessary step in that direction. How do you respond?
Urgent action to combat climate change is indeed necessary, but it must be realistic and economically sustainable. The current approach of the Biden administration risks undermining our economic stability and energy security in the pursuit of rapid decarbonization. A more balanced approach would focus on encouraging innovation and technological advancements in both renewable and traditional energy sectors. This could include investments in research and development for cleaner fossil fuel technologies, nuclear energy, and advanced renewable technologies. It's also essential to work with global partners to ensure that climate efforts are coordinated and that other major emitters, such as China and India, are held accountable for their emissions. Additionally, policies should support a just transition for workers and communities that are dependent on fossil fuel industries. Abruptly shifting away from these industries without providing viable economic alternatives can lead to job losses and economic decline in affected regions.
We've covered a lot of ground today. As we conclude this three-part series, what final thoughts do you have on the Biden administration and the path forward for conservatives?
As we wrap up this discussion, it's clear that the Biden administration's policies have had far-reaching and often negative impacts on our country. From immigration and economic policies to foreign affairs and energy, the administration's approach has been characterized by mismanagement, overreach, and a disregard for the principles that underpin our democracy. For conservatives, the path forward involves advocating for policies that uphold the rule of law, promote economic freedom, and ensure national security. We must remain vigilant in defending our constitutional principles and pushing back against policies that undermine our values and institutions. It's also crucial for conservatives to engage in constructive dialogue and build coalitions that can effectively challenge the current administration's agenda. This means reaching out to independents and moderates who share our concerns and presenting a clear and compelling vision for the future. Ultimately, the strength of our democracy lies in the active participation of its citizens. By staying informed, involved, and committed to our principles, we can ensure that our nation remains a beacon of freedom and opportunity for generations to come.
Robert, thank you for sharing your insights and perspectives with us throughout this series. It's been an enlightening and thought-provoking discussion. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to AI Talk. Stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll see you next time.